Let's talk about what's stopping you from becoming self-sufficient. The media might make you think you're not cut out for it. The world might make you think you're just not good enough. But it's my job to explain to you that entrepreneurship is not as hard as they make it out to be. And I'll debunk these myths with research and facts. Stick around and let's find out. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Muhammad Ishlal. I was an entrepreneur who became a brand manager. I've got a double MBA. Now, let's start by talking about why exactly do you want to become an entrepreneur? Well, the reason is plain and simple. It makes you happier. And I feel like that's a pretty good reason to do it, right? So research by these three authors, whose names I cannot pronounce, so apologies for that. They researched with over 3,000 graduates in 1990. And what they found was that founders and startup owners were the happiest of the lot. They compared them against consultants, finance, manufacturing, engineers, everybody. But they were the happiest lot within the graduating batch because I feel like they were doing what they really wanted to do and they were making an impact. And suddenly all of the noise becomes irrelevant. Hence, even people from the public sector were less happier than the people who were happier with their choice, who eventually ended up starting their own business. Number two, there are career benefits to it. But wait, how exactly does that happen? So once you're done with your undergraduate or your master's, what essentially happens is when you go back to your job, if you go back to the private sector as an employee, the kind of bump that you get is much lower versus if you start something of your own and you become a founder of that business. In a research where they judged people according to their seniority level between a CEO and an analyst, what happened post your undergraduate or master's, the founders or the entrepreneurs had a much bigger jump post their degree versus somebody going back to their job. And essentially the route to becoming a CEO of a company is much smaller if you're a founder. Imagine you go back to your company and then the road to a CEO is pretty much post an MBA or a master's degree, you jump one level, but you still have quite a few levels above that. But if you're a founder of the company, the road to CEO is probably one position up, but the benefits don't end there. Overall, entrepreneurship is also better for everybody around you. In a research in the US, it showed that 70% of the job creation in US was done through young new firms. While another research showed that startups generally become the engine for innovation and productivity growth. So now that we've established that it's great for you, it's amazing for those around you, then where's the problem? Well, the problem lies in the fact that those around you have made you believe that number one, your idea is not good enough. Number two, you're maybe not the visionary you think you are, which, trust me, I'll tell you are. And number three, maybe you're too goddamn old now, which you're not. Well, the biggest myth in entrepreneurship that stops you from starting the next big thing is that you feel like your idea is just not good enough. Your idea is not worth $1 billion. And that might be true, but what successful entrepreneurs do is these three things. They refine, they improve, and then they bring it to market way better than anybody else. Let's take an example from the past. Let's take the example of a light bulb. Who invented the light bulb? Everybody snaps to Thomas Edison. Did he actually invent the light bulb? If you look into the history of the light bulb, in 1799 in Italy, Alessandro Volta mistakenly discovered electrical lighting. After him, Humphrey Davy was the first person to create the first incandescent light. Then Warren de la Rue refined the idea. He used a platinum filament in a vacuum. And then 10 years later, Joseph Swan developed the first working incandescent lamp. And then in 1874, 5 years before Thomas Edison, they developed the first working bulb and brought this to market. But then why do we attribute this to Thomas Edison? Because he was able to make it commercially viable. He was able to make sure that the idea was practical and the bulb had a longer lifespan. He was able to ensure they were able to mass produce this idea. Hence, he was able to bring this to market way better. And that is why we all think that it's Thomas Edison's idea. Researchers Matt Marks and David Su went over 20,000 scientific discoveries to figure out what exactly is it that makes some businesses successful while the others not. What they found was that if you've got a team with prior commercialization experience and interdisciplinary backgrounds, so they're bringing viewpoints from everywhere within the company, that's way more important than anything else. We all think that we need venture capital in order to make our business viable and successful. Well, they found out that that's not necessarily true. Instead, they relied on testing the ideas, building the right team, and then having a strategic execution in order to make that a commercial success. So I think it's only fair we also talk about companies from the current day and age that we feel like are on the cutting edge of invention. And let's just think about the people that we associate with that. We'll talk about the 5 major companies. So we'll talk about Facebook, Tesla, Snapchat, Uber, and Netflix. Now think about the faces that you associate with all of these 5 companies. With Facebook, you always think of Mark Zuckerberg. In fact, if you've seen The Social Network, it's not him who came up with the idea. It was the Winklevoss twins. Similarly with Tesla, we usually credit the efficiency driving Elon Musk as the person behind the idea for electric vehicles. It wasn't. It was Martin Eberhard. Thirdly, with Snapchat, it wasn't Evan Spiegel. It was Reggie Brown. Same with Uber. It's not Travis Kalanick. It's Garrett Camp. And with Netflix, once again, it's not Reed Hastings. It's Mark Randolph. Now, these are all people you've probably never heard of, but these are the people who had the original idea. But the people you recognize today are the people who we associate with the commercial success of all of these businesses. And maybe if these people weren't there, these businesses would never be this big enough. So now let's talk about the second biggest hurdle there is. Do you need to be a visionary who knows the future, knows what the customers are going to look like, what they need, and more importantly, how do you develop that product that's going to absolutely answer all their needs? Well, that's impossible to do. Let's think about the biggest visionary we know of our current age. Might be debatable, but for me, it's Steve Jobs. Did Steve Jobs have the insight to know what the customers wanted? Absolutely not. He came up with multiple ideas throughout, but he was able to refine, improve, and then bring all of them to market way better than anybody else. You can think about Macs, you can think about iPods, you can think about iPhones. Every single invention that he had, they weren't really inventions, but he was able to do all of those things better than anybody else in the market. Let's look at an example from the past. Willard Marriott, along with his wife, in 1927, put together a 9-seat beer stand in Washington, D.C. This was their first step into the food business. 2 years later, they pivoted. They moved towards a drive-in restaurant. Because people were buying new automobiles, the customer trends were changing, and there was hot weather and people wanted fast service for their meals. But decades later in 1957, they put their first step into the hospitality business. The biggest hotel international chain that we know of today was developed in 1957 because of their market knowledge and what they had learned from the food business. And that's what businesses are about. So now we can't stop without talking about science. Now imagine you're thinking about a new business idea. Well, I believe you're always the most optimistic at the very start when you don't know much about the business and how it's going to happen. You always feel like you can launch this and be the next big thing there is. But they call that Mount Stupid. Because that's when you have the most amount of confidence while having the least amount of market knowledge. And what happens is, post that, your confidence just goes downhill until you hit this stage where you sort of plateau. This is where you're balancing your confidence with what you've learned from the experience you've gained. Most of the people lack the motivation within this stage. They lose that motivation and they close down the business. But people who are able to persevere through this are able to grow this business and their confidence grows, and they're probably able to refine, improve, and bring it to market way better because now they have the same amount of confidence, but also with the experience to go with it and to have a much better strategic execution that they would have had otherwise. And now the final myth. There's a perception that if you have to be a successful entrepreneur, you have to be a young prodigy. Otherwise, it's not possible. Mark Zuckerberg said that young people are just smarter. It's that plain and simple for him. While Paul Graham tells us that in an investor's mind, 32 for them is the cutoff age, post which they sort of become skeptical whether or not they want to invest into this. And media sort of feeds into the same sort of frenzy. We looked at a couple of publishers, including TechCrunch and a couple of others, and the mean age for all the successful entrepreneurs that they published about was 31. Now, there are a couple of reasons they believe this. Number one, they feel like younger generation has more transformative thinking. Number two, they feel like they could take more risks because they're not as risk averse as somebody with a mortgage is. And number three, plain and simply, they feel like they've got more time and energy on their hands. But funnily enough, they couldn't be far from the truth. In a research by authors from Wharton, MIT, Northwestern, and the US Census Department, they studied over 2.6 million businesses over 7 years to identify patterns which aren't cherry-picked. And they found out that the average age for an entrepreneur in a new business is 42. But it's not fair to look at the overall group because a huge chunk of these were made up of restaurants, nail salons, and retail outlets. So let's have a cut of only the tech startups. If we look at only high-tech entrepreneurs, the average age within that was in fact higher at 43, while businesses with patents had an even higher age of 45. But once again, maybe this means that we're not looking at the most successful businesses. So if we have a look at 1 in 1,000 of the fastest growing businesses, the average age was in fact higher at 45. But maybe that's still not the creme de la creme, right? So we look at businesses that have had an IPO or a successful merger and acquisition with one of the other companies. The average age was even higher at 46. So I feel like this sort of establishes that age is actually just a number. You need that experience to be able to refine, improve, and bring your idea to market even better. Businesses that had people who had 3 years or more experience within the same industry before starting the business had a 90% chance of success. So all of this combined establishes that all the roadblocks that you had in your mind, that you're not able to start the next big thing, they were absolutely wrong. You can. All you need to do is refine, improve, and bring it to market way better than anybody else. And for that, you don't need to be a young person. In fact, you need the experience to do that. If you found any value in this video, please like this video so this video is shown to more people and more people can find value. Thanks a lot. I'll see you again. Bye.